Hi, everybody. My name's Lauren, the amazing Penny Kula, the fabulous real estate to the stars. And one of the things that we keep hearing about all the time, she's got clients and, we're sharing a client right now that is a brand new home buyer. So I think Penny does such a fantastic job of educating her clients, and I'm all about that education. So I don't even know what the whole real estate contract thing is all about. So Penny's going to walk through it like I'm a brand new home buyer and I get to ask questions. So yay. All right, Penny, take it.
Yay. Okay. Well, as a first-time home buyer, I'll say you as a first-time home buyer are probably not aware of all the intricacies, the legal aspects, the pitfalls and the details that are involved in a home purchase in Arizona. And here in Arizona, which is rather rare, the real estate agents actually write the contracts. It's in the Arizona state constitution. So we have to be as educated as we can. A buyer can always bring in an attorney if they wish, but typically they don't, because
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in some states, in many states, the attorneys handle the contract paperwork. And in Arizona, it's the real estate agents, the realtors. So with that in mind, when I'm working with a first-time home buyer or someone who hasn't purchased in a really long time,
right,
because the contract, I think, used to be 2 or 3 pages and the purchase contract, and now it's 10 pages.
Yeah.
And there are about 20 auxiliary documents too, which we can leave for another discussion. But I like to go through a blank purchase contract with my first-time home buyers before we get too deeply into the purchase process. Because once you get into looking at homes, oh, I've got to have that one, and you rush to make the offer because real estate is still competitive here in the Valley, even though it has slowed down somewhat because of the interest rate hikes and other things that are happening.
Interest rate perception. Keep going.
Perception. Okay, sorry about that, Lauren. Lender hat on. So anyway, the market isn't as frantic as it has been in the past couple of months, but it's still an active, competitive market. So when you find a home that you like and you want to put in your offer, that's not the time to try to understand, what am I doing? Because we need to have the buyer understand what they're doing prior to signing on the dotted line. So I downloaded a copy of the purchase contract for myself here and we'll just be brief. There's always more detail, maybe for another meeting or another discussion.
Sure. Can I jump in? And
yes, please.
So one of the things that I noticed as a lender on number 5 on the first page says you have a certain number of days or something. I think, what was it, to have a pre-qualification, which most agents won't even take a client out looking unless they've had the pre-qualification.
That seems to be, yes, that was a great point, because when I reread this, I saw that verbiage and I thought, no, because see if I can find the line much earlier on.
I saw it too. It was
much
shocking
earlier on. It says that the line 69.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is, I don't remember the year that was added to the contract. It was a few years ago. An AAR pre-qualification form from a lender is attached here too and incorporated herein by reference. So that verbiage, I think you said it was on page 5, which would be that the pre-qual is to follow. That line probably should be removed from the contract, because the line 2A, line 69 pre-qual supersedes that, in my opinion.
Totally.
Yeah, I saw that too. That's old language.
Well, it's good if you think about it. it makes sense because most
Of course.
people, they don't call me first. They call, the
Yeah.
listing agent on this house they see on Zillow and da, da, da.
Yeah.
And that's when the frenzy starts. So I think it's awesome that you walk through this with, when people are calm and not emotional.
Sure. And besides which, I usually won't even go out a first time looking with a buyer until they have their pre-qualification form from the lender,
Smart.
because we don't want the buyer's eyes to be bigger than what they can afford, and then they get disappointed. I don't want to show them something that's out of their price range. I don't want to put in many hours in the field with a buyer who's not qualified for some reason.
And
So
sometimes we think, even I think they're perfect, and then something pops up that we didn't even know about. Something on credit that no one knew was there, or some all sorts of little things. So it's always better to do it that way. I agree.
right, and especially when it's a first-time home buyer, which tends, not always, but tends to be a little on the younger side. They're not aware of everything that goes into having them actually qualified to purchase a home.
Right. Yeah.
So it's for
The
their
next one
protection.
I saw on here, I just went through it line by line, but
Sure.
and I think it's pertinent to this day and age, the CC&R. So I have a lot of clients, a lot of young clients, never bought a house before, but they want to buy something and then they want to rent it out on Airbnb. Well, CC&Rs are really important because sometimes they prohibit you from doing that, or it's a 30-day or a 60 or no short-term rental stuff. So I thought that was kind of cool. It was on the first page too.
Yes, and with that in mind, because the Airbnbs have become so prevalent and have caused great distress in a lot of communities, really early on, very early on in the discussion with the buyer, typically the first-time home buyers is for their personal residence. So I want to discuss with them, do you want a community which, at least at this time, is capable of preventing Airbnbs because they have a month, a 3-month, 6-month minimum rental term. If the buyer's an investor, they will be upfront with that right away.
Yeah.
So then that's a whole other thing. And I was looking through some listings for our mutual client that we have.
Yeah.
And finding several that fit his desires, and he will be residing in the unit. So I actually called all of the HOAs to see what their latest is on minimum rental term. And I eliminated some of the listings because not that there's anything wrong with the listings, and an investor client would pounce on those listings, but for somebody who wishes quiet enjoyment of their personal home and has expressed to me that they would like there to be a minimum rental term of a month or more. So that's, another couple of hours of research before I even take them out.
Right. And that's so important because, the clients don't really necessarily know. And if they get their heart set on something, it's awesome that you check on that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And they don't even know what CC&Rs are, but it's the, I guess you could say, the rules of the community, for want of a better way to put it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we try to get the CC&Rs early, but everything is in such a rush now to purchase before a competing buyer grabs the property that I haven't been doing that, but I have been checking on the minimum rental period before taking the buyer even to look.
So smart. So smart.
I'll call the listing agent. Very often they know.
Yeah.
But if they're not sure, or they don't want to assume the responsibility of telling you something that could no longer be accurate, I'll call the HOA.
Yeah. So smart. Very cool.
And that's something that at present, the HOAs, to an extent, and I don't know all the details, are being challenged by some homeowners who feel that they should not be prevented from making all the income they can through the rental of their home. And there are court cases now within communities with CCNRs, challenging those CCNR restrictions, but there's a lot of detail to that that I'm not familiar with.
Right.
But all I can tell my clients is, as of now, the
Well,
minimum.
even lending, it's as of now. Guidelines change all the time.
Yeah,
So yeah, no, I totally get that.
yeah.
All right. Well, do you want me to keep going or do you want to jump in?
I'll jump in, but feel free to also jump in.
Okay.
Because, I get very bogged into the details of this, and you may not feel for this round of our discussion that it's too important. So you have to explain to the buyer what earnest money is. They may not understand that when they submit a contract and we're filling in the details of what they're going to pay and how that payment is going to be made, we have to fill in a line that says earnest money. And that is the money if the seller accepts the contract, and if then I, as the buyer's agent, open the escrow with a title company, which first-time buyers don't know what title companies are either. So,
Right.
It's a long discussion, but basically I should say the escrow company will hold their money, showing that they're earnest. And depending on how they, meaning the buyer, proceeds with what they're required to do, that earnest money is safe, but could be at risk if they inadvertently make a mistake down the line in their duties, as far as following through with the steps that have to be taken to get from opening escrow to closing escrow. So,
right. So I get asked that all the time. So earnest money, it's like a deposit, right? So this is how much I want your house, and I'm going to give you this much upfront to make sure that you hold it for me while we go through this process, and you can't accept any other offers, blah, blah, blah. In my world, there's only 3 ways you get it back. If you have a loan denial, in other words, you don't qualify. It used to be that the appraisal came in low, but now that's a whole nother conversation. That could be written into the contract that you might cover the gap.
But if not, that's a legitimate way to withdraw from the contract. Right.
And then the third was the home inspection, which is not the appraisal. Those are 2 separate things. So go ahead. I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. And it's not only those things, but it's the disclosures, because the buyer has the right to review the CCNRs. If the home was built before 1978, the buyer has the seller is required to supply any lead paint information that they have or don't have. They just check don't have. And they supply the buyer with a pamphlet, how to protect your family from lead paint in your home.
Don't knock on the windowsill.
And the buyer then has the right to get a lead paint assessment. So there are a lot of, if you want to call them outs, legitimate outs for the buyer, which would result in the buyer's ability to withdraw and get their earnest money back.
Right. Isn't there one? I think I saw one which was truly legitimate. There was like 2 sexual offenders right next door or something, and the buyer said, I'm out because I have kids.
Yes, that time frame, to my understanding, is within the inspection period. Right. So a typical, not carved in stone, but a typical inspection period would be 10 days, starting the day after the contract has been signed as day 1. The buyer has to investigate everything and anything to do with the house, the neighborhood, the schools, any record of sex offenders in the neighborhood. That all falls on the buyer.
Right.
So 10 days is not a lot of time.
No, because that's when you bring in like a roofer or a plumber.
And in addition to that, we do the formal home inspection, where at minimum, and when anybody says, oh, I'm going to waive the inspection because I just want this house right away. I'm not the decision maker, but I strongly disadvise that.
Yeah.
So typically we'll have a licensed home inspector do the home inspection.
And that's like what, $350, $400?
Depends on the size of the home.
Yeah.
probably starts around 350-ish for a condo or a townhome. If you have a large mansion type home, it can be $600 or $700 because there can be 5 bathrooms and 10 bathrooms, 5 bedrooms, you know,
Right.
a lot of things to check, plumbing and so on.
And by the way, that's not a lender requirement, like she said, you know,
Right.
that's something that is kind of a buyer beware kind of thing. But
Right.
even if you were to quote unquote waive inspection, most people will have the inspection. They're just waiving the ability to leave because of the inspection. And I've seen it where any
Right.
repairs, you know, over $2,000, they'll, you know, go back to the seller for it. But if it's under 2,000, I'm just making this up, they'll go with that. Is that true?
Yes, yes. And things changed again a few years ago where sellers, I don't want to use the word obligated, they were more expected to make repairs. And that changed a few years ago. And I hate to use the word as is, but it's more, you're buying the house as is. You need to understand that, which I would tell the buyer. However, you do have within the inspection period, and it has to be in the seller's agent's hands before the end of the 10 days, if the 10 days is our inspection period
Right.
timing, that you found too many things. You have to list them. If you want your owner's money back, you have to say, I'm withdrawing because.
Right.
Or you can offer to the seller an opportunity to make certain repairs, which you list. And the seller has 5 days to mull that over and send that response back to you, to the buyer or the buyer's agent saying, nah, I'm not going to fix anything. Or yeah, I'll fix everything. Or I'll fix A and B, but not C, D, and E. Then
Right.
the buyer needs to, I believe has 5 days then to respond back. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, or no, I'm going to withdraw. So you have to be, and I keep a list for each contract of all these time periods because they're very important.
Oh, yes.
The buyer doing their thing in the proper timeframes to protect their earnest money.
Well, not only that, that was 10 days, 5 days, 5 days. That's 20 days. And as a lender,
yes,
we don't generally want, I mean, we want to order the appraisal as soon as we can, but we don't want to order the appraisal if somebody might be walking away from the house. So if they know that they're going to just negotiate and no matter what happens, they're going to keep the house, great, we'll order it. But if that means we order the appraisal on day 20,
yes.
that's like, oh gosh, everybody
It's
freaks
a
out.
conundrum because many other balls are rolling forward with the title company, and the lender does the lender things, and the buyer's getting more and more excited about going to maybe pick out furniture and things of that nature, and the house may not appraise. So we want the appraisal done as early in the process as possible.
Right.
But the buyer needs to be told, what is it, about 450-ish?
Oh,
For an appraisal?
550,
Is it
around
550?
550. Yeah, it's give or take. That's a fee from the appraiser. So it goes
It
through
varies.
us, but it has nothing to do with us.
Right, right. So, and that's money out of pocket, has nothing to do with down payment. You have to explain this to these buyers. You have to have pocket money to pay for a few things up front, including the inspection.
Sure, the inspection, if it's a VA loan, they have to do a pest. Sometimes the seller, I think, will buy it, but the pest inspection, that's another whole inspection. So there's lots of upfront things for sure.
Right. So they need to know what money they need that they don't need for anything else to pay for these things, which are part of the process of making the decision as to whether they're actually going to buy the house or not.
Right. We're on page 1, guys, just 1.
We're still on page 1. Well, actually, no, we've been jumping around.
Oh, yeah, good.
And I always write in my contracts, by the way, that the earnest money is applied toward the down payment, just so people understand, the buyer understands, and the buyer has worked with the lender to understand what their down payment is going to be. So the earnest money is applied toward that down payment.
Right. And
So they-
in some cases, some people get gifts maybe from their parents. So in that case, it's just held. And if the parents give the whole gift, then then that earnest money gets returned to
There
the
you go.
buyer. So
Yes.
it's either way. It's just a deposit.
Yes. Mhm. So
Right.
I'm actually going to turn to page 2.
Yay.
I don't think we need to talk about personal property.
So
Well,
there is one that I see a lot, that
Okay.
a lot of questions.
Okay.
I think it's line 63.
Okay.
So on a purchase contract, you know,
Mhm. Yes, correct.
lenders don't want to
They don't want
see
it. No.
any bill of sale. Like, it's better as a bill
No.
of sale. So like if you're buying the couch and the TVs and everything, that
That's
has
a
nothing
separate-
to do, that's not real estate. It's not affixed. So it's therefore just chattel. It's different.
Right. That has nothing to do with the purchase contract. However, if the buyer wants the washer, dryer, and refrigerator that are in the house, and the seller says, yeah, I don't want them, they will transfer, but at no value.
Right.
So they'll stay, and that does go into the actual purchase contract. That
Yeah.
they want the appliances that are there that are not attached, but the
Right.
seller doesn't want them, the buyer would like to have them, but they transfer at no monetary value.
Right. Right.
But as
Yeah.
far as other types of personal property, furniture, this, that, and the other thing, if the buyer wants to purchase some of that, that's between buyer and seller. The real estate agents are not licensed to negotiate personal property. I just say, here's a piece of paper, write your list. I'll send it over to the seller's agent and they'll give it to the seller, and then the buyer and the seller determine what they want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't want to see that on a contract. It'll.
No, and it has nothing to do with the purchase of real property.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
Let's see.
Financing. We've talked about that. The
We talked
time
about that one,
frames.
yeah.
The time frames are really important. And actually, I had a question for you, Lauren, because things change over the years. So on the 3 days, so this would be line 73, prior to close of escrow date, buyer shall either sign all loan documents, which is the way it kind of used to be.
What page are you on? I mean, what line?
73.
Okay.
Or deliver to the seller and title company notice of the loan approval without PDT conditions and date of receipt of closing disclosures. So that then can take, and if I'm understanding this correctly, that can take the place of the buyer signing 3 days prior, if all of that has been delivered 3
Correct.
days
So
prior. Is that correct?
yes, so there's two things. One is a closing disclosure or a CD, and the other one is a prior to doc closing disclosure. So
Right.
that means we have everything we need and we're just waiting. We're waiting out the time. So we're
Okay.
good. We have a clear to close with no problems. We just have to wait out the 3-day wait period, which is necessary. That's that 3-day thing. So if we
Could
get
you
a
explain that a little more?
the 3-day wait.
Mhm.
Yeah, so when a client gets, if we don't have a pre-audit CD, which would start that 3-day clock, it's basically that it's not a right of rescission, but it's a little bit of a cool off, and title has to have those documents 3 days prior to close. So when we get the pre-audit CD, we start that clock going so that the final loan documents can be signed on one day and you can close the next day. Otherwise, you got to sign the final loan documents and then close 3 days later. You don't want to do that. So we very rarely do it that way.
Right.
So
Right.
we will get the pre-audit CD every single time we can. Some lenders don't, and it just makes everybody panicky. So we don't want to mess with that. But also, I do want to say there's other loan products. So I have the ability to do the weird stuff that doesn't follow what's called TRID. And what does that stand for? So I can't remember. I just know the word. I'd have to look it up. But TRID is what creates that 3-day period. So some lenders and programs don't follow the TRID guidelines, and therefore we don't care about the 3 days. So it just depends on which one. But your loan officer should know that stuff. They might not know what the letters stand for because it's not on the top of my head because it's on the test that you take and you always forget. But TRID is real. It's like you have to wait that 3 days unless you have a pre-audit CD. So we can get that to a client and then it just calms the process down a little bit.
Okay.
I hope it's a crappy answer, but I could look it up right now while
No, that's fine. It's amazing how the purchase contract and the rules have become more and more complex over time. So.
yes.
All
Yes.
right.
And
again,
it's the TILA RESPA integrated disclosure rule. That's what it is. So TILA and RESPA are the truth in lending and the real estate basically rules that we all have to go by in with real estate. So the TILA is the lending and the RESPA is the real estate. That makes it's a crappy answer, but it's gonna
no, it's fine. It's fine. And then there are a lot of 3-day things in the contract, but the buyer has to understand, and this is again, line 75, one of the highlighted, very highlighted things that I go over with the buyer. If the buyer's lender determines that the buyer, for some reason, toward this end of this process, and you can explain it better than I can, does not qualify after making a good faith effort, the buyer has to deliver a notice of inability to obtain loan approval,
which comes from a lender. So I'm not the lender, the lender. So if that happens, I have to reach out to the lender and tell them why. And they actually, it's called an NOA, notice of action. So the lender will issue an NOA, which is a loan denial. And that's what you would need in order to get your earnest money back. Note though, it's interesting. I've heard different things that insufficient funds to close is not a denial.
No.
So if for some reason, and it's happened, somebody loses their job or quits, that's a loan denial.
Right.
You go out and buy a car and now you have a liability that we didn't know about before, and it blows the debt to income, that's a notice of action or loan denial, stuff like that.
Right.
But we've had many people quit their jobs and lenders will actually call, and maybe they should know this. Lenders will call the employer the day before to verify that you're still working. And so, funny story, I had one client I adore. We've done a few loans for him, and he was job hunting and just, brilliant kid, just couldn't find the right home. So every single time we did his purchase, and then we tried to refinance him, and he would literally lose his job. They did layoffs last year when he'd lose it 2 days before we were closing. And we're like, so we had to start all over again. It's not the end of the world though, because he had, we needed a job offer from another job, and we had that. So, but yeah, two times. First time he lost his job on a layoff, second time he left. I'm like, what are you doing? You're killing us. But it was funny. We got it done. But they will call. Yep.
And just a brief thing, then it's just not really a buyer thing, it's more of a lender thing. Loan status update. Yep. Within 10 days of purchase contract, a loan status update is required. And then anytime the agents want one.
Yeah, we do it every week.
Yeah, most good lenders do it weekly. Okay. Yeah. So moving along, unless you had something to say about that.
No, keep going.
Okay. Moving along.
I hope our Zoom doesn't time out, because it might.
Okay.
But this is great. I love it. We're gonna make a whole series.
Okay. Whatever you're the orchestrator here. You're the conductor.
It hasn't told me anything yet, so let's keep going.
Okay. All right. Let me see.
I have one. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Changes. This is important because I've had it happen. If the buyer changes lenders or changes the loan program or the financing terms or anything, they do have to inform all parties. even if it doesn't affect the contract, the close of escrow date, or their ability to close or anything, but they do have to inform parties. And I've had it happen to me as a listing agent,
Sure.
where I call the lender for an update and say, we're not the lender anymore. Say, what?
Ooh, yeah, that's not good.
No. Whoever's working on the buy side needs to keep all parties informed if there are changes in the
Sure.
loan, even
So-
if it doesn't affect their closing on time.
Absolutely. So that let me unpack that a little bit. So
Sure.
there's a difference between programs. So in other words, if you were going from conventional to FHA or the other way
Right.
around, or you wanted to go, that would be program. Financing is, so the financing would be a different type of financing. So it's FHA financing, so that's kind of the same thing. The program to me is this financing.
Okay.
Here's where it gets interesting. As a buyer, if the buyer, let's say the buyer makes an offer with 20% down, and as the loan officer, I have identified that they have that. It wasn't, we didn't just stick it on there just to make it up.
Right.
So they actually have it. But then everything's moving along, they're staying with that same program, but they make a decision to go, you know what, I'd rather put 5% down. That does not need to be disclosed to anybody. That's the buyer's personal financial, structuring. As long as they can qualify for the 5% down, there's no issue and no one needs to know. So just like no one needs to know their rate. But if it was going from FHA to conventional or the other way around, that's where you need, or a different lender altogether. Maybe you don't like your loan officer and you love me, so you come over here. So whatever, but that I would have to say, I'd have to pre-qual that person and then let you know as the buyer's agent first, hey, this is what we're doing. And then we would have to let the listing agent know. But if it's a change in down payment in the structuring of the loan, not the program, but the structuring, nobody needs to know that.
That's interesting because when a seller is choosing among, say, multiple offers, a larger down payment is considered to be more favorable because it shows the buyer is more invested in the whole thing. So that's interesting. That it's
kind of on paper, it's funny money because it could be 20% down from a gift from my dad. It's not my money, it's my dad's money.
Yeah.
So that 20%. Sure. And that's where, in my opinion, as a loan officer, I would be calling the listing agent and explaining, look, financially, it is so much more beneficial for them to do the 5% because they have this amazing investment account. Why would they ever pull their money out of an investment account that's yielding more than they're paying? So, if it makes financial sense, then there's no reason to do 20% down.
Yeah.
And so some people don't want to deplete their complete savings and they just want the 5%. Or here's another example. They're only keeping the house for 3 years. You'd never throw 20% if they're only going to keep it for 3 years. So I get that listing agents think that that's a indicator of eligibility for a loan. It's so not. It really isn't. You just have to get a good loan officer that asks the right questions of their client.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, but that's just my opinion.
Total sense. And then the appraisal, which needs to be explained. I don't know if we'll have time for that today because it's kind of a big topic.
Big one.
Of course, first the buyer has to understand that the appraisal has nothing to do with inspection. They're two separate things.
They call it an appraisal inspection, but yes, the appraisal.
Yes. And am I correct that the appraisal is required by the lender?
Yes. So the lender requires the appraisal unless they decide to waive it. So sometimes the lender will, and that's different than waiving the appraisal when you're writing a purchase contract. Totally different. Yeah. So the lender requires the appraisal unless there is a waiver from the lender. So we don't know that until we submit the contract. So we wouldn't, typically it's when your loan to value is very low. So the risk to the lender isn't
Sure.
really there. Therefore, they don't really need to know
Sure.
if, usually it's 20% or more. Sometimes we'll get it around 20%. So you'll count on having an appraisal for sure, always. And that is an expense that's put on a credit card, the buyer's credit card.
Yes.
And then we run it through and the appraisal company. And by the way, newsflash, we don't get to talk to the appraisers ever. We're completely separate. Thank you, Dodd-Frank.
Yeah. And it used to be, they would say that the real estate agents had to stay at arm's length, but I've heard lots of discussion that if you're just providing information,
Yes.
that it's perfectly clean and okay
Unbiased. Yeah.
to provide information such as
comps.
And how because if an agent is working in a community that they know well, they
Sure.
may know that the neighbor's new flooring was Pergo,
Yeah.
whereas the new flooring that's in the property under discussion is hardwood.
Right.
So that's information that is, I don't think there's any bias in that information. It's just information.
Right. So I don't know if you knew this. I used to be an appraiser.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
Yeah. So it's actually helpful when agents will like leave comps on the counter, because it gives the appraiser a little leg up and just maybe something that they might not have found. It's when real estate agents are pressuring them to get a certain value.
Sure.
That's where it's biased. And believe it or not, the appraiser has the ability to walk away. They are allowed to say, I feel biased and
I see.
need to leave. So yeah, you wouldn't want to do that. But even listing agents, if it's a remodeled house, I always thought it was helpful. Put the invoice out, what was done.
Yes. That's what I did the last time. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful. There's actually, you're not allowed to give an appraiser cookies. That's kind of funny. That's like incentivizing. So that makes me laugh. But appraisers are really, it's a subjective opinion of value, which means you could put 3 appraisers on the same property and you're going to get 3 different results. Right. But appraisal, this is the difference. Realtors pay attention usually to price, which is usually defined somewhere like with the square footage amount and the price of the house. Appraisers look at value, and value means how much will someone pay for it. So that's like 3 months, 6 months, 9 months back, something similar. The way it goes is most proximate, most recent, and then most similar. So the closer the comp, the more recent the sale, and then the most similar features. That's how they adjust their values to figure it out. Long story short.
Also difficult for appraisers and for everybody with a rapidly accelerating market.
Very.
Which it's not at this moment, but say, 6 weeks ago and back.
Totally.
For quite a few months. So used to be in the old days, the appraisers went back 6 months.
Totally.
As a matter of course. And now it doesn't. It's hard because really those no longer apply. Right.
And you have cash offers, which are different than financed offers. So there's adjustments for that as well. So date of sale has it's hard for appraisers because the data hasn't caught up to the market almost. Like the 6 months ago is so different than now, and it has to catch up. So that's where appraisal gaps come in. And
yes, and I think appraisers, as I understand it, account for that to the extent that they can.
They can, yeah. Right.
To the extent that they can.
Sure. And then it's harder with a unique property. So some of the historic properties are a little more unique.
Yes.
No negative implication, or I don't mean anything negative, but there's a cookie cutter tract home that's easier to appraise because you can match apples to apples. But if you have some historic home or some, weirdly constructed house, you need to find a comp, and sometimes there isn't one right next door. So it's challenging for sure. but
Yeah.
we're separated from the appraisers. We can only figure out, when they're coming and when their report's going to be.
Sure, sure. And we really are too, except for providing comps or receipts of the big remodel that was just done, which is
Right.
Just facts.
Right. And then, the other thing too is just, I know a lot of agents will kind of time that you're aware of the pending sales that are in process, right?
Yes,
So
yeah.
if something's supposed to close at a certain amount on a certain day, then you kind of want to try to time your close past that, so you can bring that comp so the appraiser sees the comp that, so there's all sorts of little things. That's why I use people like Penny, because she knows how to do
Oh, thank you. And just one other thing on, it's always arm's length with appraisers, but there was one time when a beautiful house that we had under contract in a quiet, gorgeous, scenic neighborhood. And in the appraisal, they had dinged the amount that the house was worth, however you want to put that, subtracted from its worth, because it was sitting on a busy road.
Yep.
And it was not sitting on a busy road. It's not near a busy road. So I made the call to the lender and I said, I'm sorry, but this is completely inaccurate.
And they hopefully did a revision of value. It's called an ROV.
They did.
We can do that.
And that's not interfering, I don't think, but it was a blatant
error.
Should we say just mistake? Error.
Sometimes I bet, and I don't know, it can't speak to that particular one, but I do know that appraisers, myself included when I was doing it, you use templates. So sometimes if you didn't uncheck the box,
Exactly.
So, everybody's human, they make mistakes, but usually in that case, the appraisers are very quick to change the report.
Yeah, it was changed.
Yeah.
But
it's when people challenge the value, that's when sometimes the appraisers will dig in their heels and say, no.
Sure. And rightfully so.
Right.
Rightfully so.
Job is independent. Right.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very cool. Oh, I love this. All right. I think, unless there's another one, my ticker's going off. So I want to make sure, but I love this. So can we do part 2?
Yeah, we can do part 2 and part 3.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. This is so cool. So we stopped at appraisal. The next up is title and escrow, which is always a party. Woo-hoo-hoo. No, it's really not. But
and a couple of details still on appraisals because of how that has changed with the so-called waiving of the appraisal or waiving it up to a certain amount, because it used to be if it didn't appraise,
that's it.
You can withdraw, well, you can anyway, unless you've written in other verbiage, or the seller and the buyer would have a little, through their agents, a little discussion. Buyer is going to withdraw because it didn't appraise. However, if buyer and seller want to split the difference, we'll write an addendum and we'll move forward.
Yeah.
That used to be the solution if the buyer wanted to stay in. And now we've got it all pre-written on waiving the appraisal, meaning the buyer will make up the difference, or waiving the appraisal up to a certain amount, the buyer will make up the difference. And that makes me a little nervous. But.
Right. I'm seeing a lot. I'm seeing more sellers more flexible with that. Like I'm seeing fewer people waiving it completely. I see more escalation clauses, but yeah, part 2 might be the appraisal, like what that really means, because I think that's a really important thing for first-time home buyers to really understand.
Yes, and always reminding them about the safety of their earnest money. They have to do the right thing at the right time, or they need to understand that. I'm forgetting the word for it now because I'm tired and I apologize. The seller's recourse is the wrong word, but if the buyer breaches, the seller's compensation is the wrong word too. Typically will just be retaining the earnest money.
Right.
They really typically don't go beyond that, but there are ways to lose your earnest money if you don't do the right thing at the right time. So, and
also as a buyer, if you're kind of wishy-washy, I'll speak for myself as a loan officer, I'm very aware of both. I want to be fair to both sides. So that seller is tying up the house for the buyer. So
Oh, sure.
if, you know, that's time on the market, maybe they need to move, maybe they have a loan that they need, you know, they need the money out of their house to go buy something else. So there's all these pieces, it's like dominoes. And if
It
one
is.
stops, then it kind of log jams everything. So, you know, being aware of that, I think is really good. And
It is. It's nothing's ever one-sided. You always want the win-win. You always want to, if the parties are being straightforward with each other and performing the way they should according to the terms of the contract and terms of morality, if you want to put it that way, then
yeah,
you do everything you can to make it work for both. It doesn't matter which side you're representing.
Right.
If everybody wants the same outcome.
those are the only people I like to work with.
Life's
Right?
too short otherwise, right?
It's true. It's so true. Penny, I am
Yes.
so grateful
All right.
to you. This was so much fun. So
It was fun.
I'm gonna hold you to it. We're gonna do part 2. Because I
Good,
think it's
part
awesome.
2.
I just, my ticker thing is counting down.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got my like a
2
minute.
seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, part 2 and probably part 3. I'm open. So
I love
whatever
it.
you want to do, Lauren.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your
The
time.
wonderful Penny Kula. Yay, Penny.
Wonderful, Lauren.
I'm gonna put this on YouTube and I'm gonna drop the links to reach Penny and me underneath this. So check it out.
Yay.
If you have more questions, you can always call us.
Wonderful.
Yeah, cool. All right, Penny,
Cool.
I will call you later. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank
You
you for
too.
your time.
Thank you for your time and expertise, and have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.